Let's have a look at viewports. So mine starts with a default perspective window, and we're currently viewing a model, a scene model of a logo in wireframe. So the viewports have different viewing options inside each viewport. We can move around the viewports using the Alt and mouse button configurations, and we can blow up the windows or enlarge the windows by hitting the space bar as we move through. So looking at this model at the moment, we can see the wireframe. We can see the model split into two parts. We have a base mesh on the floor, and then we have a SVG mesh. This mesh has come out of Adobe Illustrator, so it's the logo for the 3D animation mentor that we've set up. And we can look at the shading modes. If we go to the shading modes in the viewport, we can go to shading and we can hit the smooth shade all option. Okay, and then we can see that the polygons have all been filled in with a default material. So if we right mouse click on the object, we can actually go down to the materials attributes. This will bring up the attribute editor, and inside the attribute editor we can go to the end of this group, and we should see that we have a default material that's been brought in with this SVG node. So this is a blend node. By default, Maya has a default of a Lambert, so if we go to our existing materials, you can see there's an existing Lambert. So there's the Lambert shader. We'll get into shaders and materials in more detail later. And then if we walk through some of the options that we have for the shading, we can see that we can do shading on selected only. This is quite useful when you're trying to isolate or just look at what the ground plane's looking like. We have flat shade, so this is going to take away, let's just turn off the ambient, this is going to take away any of the shading going on inside the model. Let's put the blend shader back on, that's that one. Then we have a flat shade on selected items, very similar. So you see when flat shading we're just picking up the light from where the default lighting is. Then we can come down to bounding boxes. So this would be if we had a very complicated scene with lots of geometry, we could have everything as a bounding box, so it draws a box around the object. We can come up to have wireframe unshaded. So this will allow us to see the wireframe over the top of the shading method. We can use the X-ray function. This allows us to see through the objects. We can see through to the back of the objects. We can use the backface culling option, which I like to have on. And this means that when we go into an object, it won't draw the backside, so it makes it easier to select certain parts of objects. It's good with selection in component mode. We can use smooth wireframe, so this helps us with the wireframe redraws. And we can turn on hardware texturing if we had any textures on there. For instance, if we were to put a new material onto this with a simple checkerboard pattern, you can see that when we have the textures off, we don't see the checkerboard pattern. When we have the textures on, using the quick selection menu bar, you can see we have that in there. And again, if we turn on the screen space occlusion, you can see that that's been put in there as well. And screen space occlusion is quite a nice feature, depending on your graphics cards, so that you can actually see how close objects are to each other. It's quite a useful one. On the toolbar we do have some other options that we can go through. There's a lighting option, so if we had the lights turned off, or turned on, sorry, and there were no lights in the scene, there is currently no lights in the scene, we don't see anything. But if we go up to the rendering toolbar and drop in a point light, there you can see that the lighting is being updated. Let's drop another point light in as well. I'm just going to change the colour on this point light using the again, the attribute editor, we'll change this one to sort of a mid-yellow, and you start to see how we're beginning to light the scene. Maybe turn the intensity down slightly on this one, and we could turn on shadows. The trouble with shadows on point lights is it's not hardware calculated. So if we wanted to use shadows, for instance, wanted a shadow coming from this angle, we'd probably use a directional light. And they work on rotations as opposed to the object's location. So I'm actually angling the light in. So I turn this sort of down, but then turn on the shadows for this. We have lighting on. We turn shadows on. We should be able to see that in there. So as I turn this around, you can see the shadows are being turned through the object. Again, it's a good way of seeing sort of what our object is going to look like before we commit to a render pass, to have a look at what that would then finish up looking like, which we have there. So inside the Arnold renderer, you can see that we've got some shadows going on inside there, although it will be picking up the other shadows because it will pick up the shadow that we've put in from the point light, and we get a good idea of what it's starting to look like. It's pretty cool.